We have three awesome panelists with lots of experience in blockchain that are going to be with us for this second panel. We're going to start off with introductions. I guess since the questions were long, make your introductions as long as you want. Because that's about all we're going to get through before the crowd starts asking questions.
Okay. Good evening, everybody. My name is Sharad Malhotra. I lead supply chain blockchain at EY. So basically, I run blockchain engagements in supply chain, starting from going to a CEO, a CIO, or a chief supply chain officer, explaining to them what is blockchain, and it doesn't solve world hunger, and then taking them through figuring out what may be real use cases, and after that, helping them figure out what is the right POC, and then transitioning them from a POC to a pilot, and helping them envision what needs to happen across your ecosystem to take that to production. So that's what I do.
Alex Mashinsky, I'm a serial entrepreneur, famous for two things. I'm going to tell you one of them, the second one you have to Google. So I wrote the original protocols and patents for voice over IP. Anyone here used voice over IP? So today it's the world's largest decentralized application. Over 1 billion people use it every day. So what you guys were talking about in the first panel about applications, that's a killer app, decentralized. And I'm currently the founder and CEO of Celsius Network. We just finished our ICO, raised 50 million. And we'll be talking about decentralization going forward.
Thank you. And very difficult act to follow. So thank you, Professor. You made me want to go back to school. So, so my name is Juan Ruiz. I'm with IBM. I've been with them for a year and a month now. And I'm in the IBM blockchain unit and responsible for business development. So it's a team of us looking at, how blockchain technology can be applied in different verticals. And obviously, one of the key areas that we identified early on was supply chain. And more recently, I've been leading our collaboration initiative with Maersk on the Global Trade Digitization project.
Where is that collaboration right now? Like, what stage is it at? Because I've definitely read quite a few articles about it. Where are you guys at right now?
We start good. So we actually made a press release in mid-January where it was announced that Maersk Line and IBM will create a joint venture with resources and employees from both sides. And we are now pending regulatory approval of that joint venture. So not because it's required, but obviously two big global companies, leaders in their space. So we want to make sure that the regulators around the globe were comfortable with us coming together to launch this new solution. So very soon, hopefully, we'll be able to announce the creation of the actual joint venture.
So how long is it going to be before all of us can go to a supermarket and actually buy food that has been tracked using blockchain?
So that's interesting because that's the other initiative that we're working on with Walmart.
That was not meant to be a softball question.
With Walmart. And that's the, so we have already actually, at IBM, we have two terms for launching products. We have the limited availability, LA version of the product, and then the general availability, GA version of the product. So actually our food trust offering is already in production on LA. So we already have people tracking food from the source in actual
Which countries, can you say?
I'm actually don't know the latest because that project again is not the one that I'm focusing on right now. But I'm sure, yeah, you can Google it and you'll find all the. So we have announced who are the foundation members and what are the other companies that we're setting up, and also I believe what geographic areas we're operating in.
Awesome. Sounds like you guys have a lot of great projects going on. Sharad, I know that you have spent quite a bit of time over the last few months talking to Fortune 500 CTOs, CIOs. Traveling from places like Cincinnati to LA to everywhere else. Either that or you just really don't want to meet with me. But seriously, if you could tell the audience maybe in whatever you're able to share about what you're seeing from the Fortune 500s. In particular, I think we'd be really interested in hearing about what you're seeing in CPGs and retailers and their readiness for supply chain on the blockchain.
By the way, before I start, so that's how much you all end up meeting your, I guess, vendors and suppliers. Me and Juan have actually been in the same meeting at the same customer. And we just realized that today, that hey, we met each other a year ago at the same customer meeting. kind of working together and collaborating. So I mean, I think, and just broadly, because I think beyond CPG retail, I've gotten to see some more as well. I think a year ago, you had, companies are more in what I call blockchain tourism, where the board of directors said, hey, we've heard about blockchain, so we should have a blockchain strategy. So they go to the CEO and they tell the CEO, hey, what's our blockchain strategy? And then they go to their CIOs and chief supply chain officers and directors, and that trickles down. And then somebody calls a vendor and says, hey, could you help us figure out what's our blockchain strategy? So that's the whole blockchain tourism, right? So I think the first initial part of this year, I felt like somebody in a part of EY suddenly who everybody wanted to talk to, and I was going meeting, whether it's CIOs or chief supply chain officers, and helping them tangle what's blockchain. However, what's happened in the last 6 months is we are seeing a lot of proposals and aggressiveness by clients who want to go to production by the end of this year. So I think we've really swung two ways when it really comes down to where blockchain was, I think, beginning of this year in terms of what enterprises wanted to do for supply chain and what we are seeing now. Having said that, what really we advise clients as they go through that journey, and I totally agree with the gentleman sitting there, it's actually a business journey first, technology comes afterwards. So, and let's just talk about supply chain, because that's the only area I know about blockchain. So in supply chain, the first thing you do is you work with a client to figure out what is that compelling business need for your supply chain. Is your supply chain requiring a cost imperative? Is your supply chain requiring a growth imperative? Or is your supply chain requiring a compliance imperative? And all use cases in supply chain, which are real and will go into production, end up falling in one of these imperatives. Now within each of these imperatives, so let's look at cost imperative, right? There's a lot of reconciliation that goes back and forth across multiple parties, right? And what does that result in? That results in companies having lots and lots of auditors reconciling those business transactions. That's a cost imperative. They have a value leakage if they don't catch those transactions. That's a great application for blockchain. Track and trace logistics, same. You have lots and lots of different entities, don't talk well with each other, multiple legacy systems, cost imperative. Growth imperative, you want to connect with your millennials, you want to show them transparency of your product, growth imperative. Compliance imperative, food trust. There's a new regulation that's coming out on tracking food, or pharma, the whole Serialization Act. So that comes down to compliance imperative. So after any organization knows what's their imperative, and within that imperative, they've actually drilled down to what's that use case, that's when you start having those conversations on what technology platform. It's really not about Ethereum or Hyperledger from the outset of the first conversation you have with the client. Actually, that really comes down to maybe your 10th conversation when you're saying, this is the business problem, this is the roadmap for me to solve this business problem, and oh, by the way, these are the 5 or 10 protocols out there that can solve that business problem, and out of which this is the particular business problem, this is the particular platform that will solve for me today. So I think, I don't know if that makes sense, but I think that's where companies are today, and that's the way they're really thinking about it.
Great. So you're definitely seeing a lot of adoption, or the beginnings of adoption, and everything going from tourism over into production and real use cases. You're seeing a lot of good ideas, but probably also some bad ideas. So for the three of you, what are some of the biggest mistakes that you see big companies making right now as they're thinking about blockchain and supply chain?
Actually, that could take the whole night, but maybe I'll start with a few. I think, and I'll just say it, I think master data management really sucks if somebody wants to implement it on blockchain. And for some reason, I do not know why so many companies have been told by so many vendors that's an awesome use case. So I don't think master data management will ever be an effective use case for supply chain. That's one for sure. You want me to go down, or should I just pass the mic?
It's up to you guys. Do you guys want to add to that?
JP Morgan copied Ethereum, right? Created their own blockchain. and went out to everybody else and said, hey, join our party. Forget about all this decentralized crypto stuff. We're just going to do it ourselves. We already have Ethereum. We don't need anything else. So, you know, so they hired actually the team is pretty good. I met a bunch of these people, and so I think technically they're good. I just think that most people are not going to trust JP Morgan to run a decentralized platform for the industry, right? Replacing the existing toll collectors. It's like, you know, so good example.
So I will say, you know, the main problem the blockchain is solving for is to be able to transact with somebody you don't know or you don't trust. So whenever you come with an example or a use case about you already know and trust that counterparty or that entity or that other person and you want to deploy blockchain technology, it's definitely not a good use case. And from an IBM perspective, and I think you mentioned that earlier, so we've been running about over 500 blockchain projects now, and about only 10% of them have become like actual, you know, production networks. So the failure rate is still high.
Well, I think some of those are also still in pilot. So it's just, those are just the ones that have made it into production so far.
Correct.
But I'm sure the clients are too, that a lot more of those will go into production as well. So we've talked a little bit about the Fortune 500s and some of the mistakes that they're making. Sounds like Sharad could go all night, but we won't do that. We'll talk about some other topics as well. Startups. I've heard from each of you about some of the mistakes that a lot of blockchain startups are making as well, as they're doing supply chain on the blockchain or just in general working with Fortune 500 companies. So what are some of the most awful mistakes that blockchain startups are making right now?
Well, you know, the typical mistake is taking an existing business, slapping blockchain or adding blockchain to the name, and then going out and saying, "Oh, we're a blockchain expert," you know. So, because really, I think it's all about reinventing the business using the blockchain or the crypto technologies, right? Kind of, we start talking about a little bit about decentralization. So decentralization is almost like the opposite. It's like the antimatter. If you think of centralized toll collectors, right, on one side, and decentralized, effectively non-for-profit on the other side. So if you're reinventing your business model as a startup, it's all about reinventing JP Morgan or reinventing Walmart or reinventing Amazon. It's not about injecting a blockchain into their business. So in my view, that opportunity is 100x, where helping these existing centralized companies do a little bit better is a 2x or a 3x. So you just have to decide what business you're in. And if you're a startup, you cannot be in a 2x business because you just can't survive in a 2x. So that's, you know.
Yeah, actually great points. And just to add to that, I think for the millennials in the room, who are relatively much younger.
How many millennials do we have in the room?
A lot, right? Okay. So,
Wow.
So the problems startups have today are the same what a decade and a half ago when you started the ERP journey those enterprises and young companies had. And that is, so, I mean, approximately about 2 decades ago when the SAP and the Oracle journey started, it was about digitizing within the 4 walls of your organization, right? And when you took a function and you started digitizing, the implementations that went terribly bad were the ones where they said, let's just slap this technology on existing business processes. And the SAP implementations a decade and a half after, which still show great results, are the ones where existing business processes were re-engineered to this new digital beginning for that enterprise. And that's the same with blockchain, right? What startups are doing is they're looking, I mean, the startups that are not doing a good job are the ones which are looking at existing business processes and saying, how can I blockchainize it, right? That's not the answer. The answer is, there is a business problem, and that business process exists because of the result of that business problem. How can I create a disruptive change in that whole function that will result in totally re-engineering that business process? And that's what startups and even large companies need to do when they think about implementing blockchain in an enterprise. Ask yourself, am I just am I looking at the existing business process between entities, and am I just slapping blockchain so that there's just a shared database, or am I truly creating a step change? Because from a startup standpoint, you need to. Otherwise, people like Juan and myself will come and do exactly what you do, relatively much cheaper, relatively much faster, right? So startups need to come up with those disruptive models for enterprise and not have the same. Sorry, sir, you had a question.
Yeah. So what you're describing sounds like a platform shift. Technology, it's not just technology, it's a platform shift. So like mobility brought us location-based services. I can order a pizza to my house. I don't have to tell my phone where it is. I can get an Uber. What's the shift here? What's this absolutely new paradigm that blockchain can deliver other than the immutability? There are systems that deliver pieces of the blockchain solution today. What are you seeing that leverages something that we did not have 5 years ago?
Did you pay him $1, Rob?
A little more than that.
Very, very passionate topic for me, actually. And so I personally feel there are lots of disruptive models that blockchain will bring to the enterprise. And before I say those, I just want to say one thing. We always highly overestimate what any emerging technology can do in the first 2 years of its cycle, and highly underestimate the impact of an emerging technology in the next 10 years of that cycle. So everything that I'm going to say is what's going to happen in the next 10 years, not in the next 2 years. So I think this whole movement of decentralization, right, has a big impact to the centralized fabric of corporations today, right? Because the way, if you look at optimization programs and transformation programs of any enterprise in the last 20 years, it was all about taking decentralized companies that they were acquiring and centralizing. So let's look at shared services, right? In a supply chain, you centralize your procure to pay, you centralize your shared services organization, right? That had its benefits, but what blockchain technology, that had its benefits initially, but what's also happened is supply chains have become fragmented, right? Companies, like 2 decades ago or even a decade ago, are no longer that vertically integrated like they were before, right? Highly fragmented supply chains. So for a highly fragmented supply chain, you need a technology that can work for a network of enterprises, not for an enterprise. And that's what blockchain brings to you today.
Not without an integration vehicle.
Right.
I'm in the EDI space.
Right.
EDI as a standard is the biggest joke in any
It is.
supply chain.
Yes.
It's not a standard. Everybody does what they want. They use the segments, elements for what they want. How does blockchain solve? So here's the highway. How do I get there?
So I think I need to give Rob another $1 because that's another hot topic, EDI, right? So I'll actually give you a live example. So I'm actually working right now with a logistics company. It works with all the top e-commerce companies, right? And it interacts with them with EDI. What I didn't know about EDI standards till I started working with them, that a particular EDI standard is not really an EDI standard because an Amazon may require a different format for that same EDI standard versus a Costco versus an Overstock, right? So I was actually surprised. And what EDI did, it created a point-to-point communication between companies, right? What blockchain allows you to do is create that entire platform on which all companies can kind of transact. Now, I know your next question, where you're coming. Your question is, but how is that possible when IBM is building their own consortium blockchain, EY may be building their own consortium blockchain?
He says that wasn't his next question.
Oh, sorry.
Question is trade card. A million platforms out there that tie
Right.
together the supply chain and the financial chain, which it sounds like most people are really talking about. They're saying supply chain, they're talking receivables management, they're talking financial chain.
Right.
Trade cards made a good attempt, at least with marketing, to link the two.
Right.
There are platforms that exist that allow you, yes, point to point. There's no transaction in the real world that doesn't involve.
Let me try.
So there's 3 parties at least.
Let me try, okay? I'll try. Reset. Hit reset, okay? So, how many people here use a bank? Have a bank account? How many people here do not have a credit card in their bank, in their pocket right now? Whoa, one guy. That's a surprise. I never get a hand up. So,
He has Apple Pay, that's why.
Apple Pay, yes. So today we all use a bank. We all use a credit card. So the bank takes your money, takes a deposit from you, and lends it to him, gives you 1% and lends it to him and charges him 25% on his credit card. And that's the cost, that's the friction, the cost of that license, right? There's so much friction at issuing, getting a new bank to get started. It's very hard, right? 60,000 rules and regulations that you have to comply with to open a bank. No one in their right mind. I haven't seen, did anyone here see a new bank anywhere? The number of banks is just shrinking every day. So even though the opportunity is huge, the profit is 24%, right? They take our money, they lend it to ourselves, and so that's the perfect example of a centralized model that is getting more and more and more centralized, bigger and bigger and bigger to fail, right? And we're all paying the price. So the replacement for that is not a better EDI system or a better algorithm or a better cryptography. The replacement is a decentralized model. So let's talk about a model that replaces that. If all of us got together and stopped giving our money to the banks, how much power would the bank have? Nothing. All of their power disappears overnight, and all of us can basically lend at 9%. Would you take it at 9% instead of 25? No problem, right? You wouldn't object to that. And pay the community, all of us, 5%, right? And it's not peer-to-peer. I'm not talking about peer-to-peer lending. I'm talking about all of us staking all of our cash or crypto together, and then from that pool, issuing loans to the people who are part of our community.
Is there a company that does that?
But my point is...
That sounds a lot like the company that you're running.
Yes, but my point is that that is a disruptive model that replaces a centralized system. It doesn't matter how much blockchain you inject into the bank. It cannot compete with the model I'm talking about. You just can't. So the opportunity is everything we're here trying to talk to you about. Decentralization is not a wave that's kind of washing off and you come out clean out of it and now you can run faster. Decentralization breaks you down to the atom level and reassembles you in 7 dimensions, and you have no idea what happened to you, right? So if you're thinking about incremental stuff, then you're not thinking. You know, you have to hit the reset button and reinvent the entire model, reinvent the entire process. And that doesn't come without problems. Believe me, I have regulators hitting me on the head every day saying you're violating this rule and you're violating this regulation and you can't do this and you can't do that. And you have to get around all of that and find a legal way of executing it. But the opportunity in this decentralized wave is to replace all of that, all of the stuff that's been built over the last few thousand years with something completely new. So I would argue that the internet is an evolutionary technology and decentralization is a revolutionary technology. It's something that came, how long is the oldest corporation? Anyone here knows? What was the first company to be incorporated? Dutch, India, exactly. Yes, so it's about, how many? 600 years or whatever? Less. 500 years. It's 500 years of centralization that is now being disrupted. Okay? That is what we're facing. So, you guys talking about EDI? EDI is a 40-year-old technology. Scrap it. It's irrelevant to what we're talking about. It's irrelevant to decentralization.
What do you think of that?
You don't need the bank.
Actually, since I know who you are, why don't you stand up and introduce yourself?
You're Australian, you can't be confrontational.
Yeah, we're not known for that. But what I've been thinking about in our path to market strategy is like, yes, this stuff like has a profound impact on how things are done in the future. It does genuinely shift what will be done. However, human beings, like the actual individuals that make the decisions, the purchasing systems, implementations decisions, seem to be, what would you say, less quick to change than our ability to write good software that does fix the problem. So part of that path to market strategy is thinking about like how companies do what they do, and what's the like backwards compatibility. Because if there's too much of a gap, then in my view, and I'd be very interested to hear what EY's thinking is on this. You need to sort of allow for adoption to be done, I guess, in parallel, and then 5% of the old style business to drop away to see if it works, and then.
So 95, I built the first VoIP node. We went to AT&T, showed it to them, and they're like, "Oh, this is good. We're gonna save so much money, right?" Just like everybody's trying to take the technology and use it just for themselves, right? And VoIP was not something that was stoppable, right? The minute there were enough nodes on the internet, AT&T couldn't do anything, right? And then you had to just integrate between the old system, the legacy system that became more and more and more expensive. It doesn't matter what you rigged over there, you couldn't compete with the voice over IP. So you need to get to that critical mass. When you get to critical mass, then everybody has to switch their model, right? So this is not a fight about you squeezing yourself in the middle and making some room for yourself between the two big guys, on the network. This is about creating a technology that's so disruptive that everybody has to come on board and get on your rails. If your rails deliver the value, everybody else will adopt their technology to get on your rails. And
so your point in the aggregate is not don't think about how customers are going to adopt new platforms, because really you need.
look at blockchain itself, right? Blockchain itself is a difficult technology. It's not an easy technology, right? And everybody's talking about why, right? Because it has that merit. People have to jump on board. They know that it's so disruptive that if they don't join in, they're going to be left on the sidelines.
So firstly, I actually agree with you. No matter how disruptive a technology is, for the enterprise, it takes time. And it's a journey. It's not a race for them. And that journey is generally a marathon. So totally agree with you. I think it's that whole stakeholder management that you have to do with the logistics guys, the procurement guys, the inventory management guys, right? And that change takes time. And I fully agree also with you. It's the ability for startups or even software developers to build the next big technology is much, much faster than companies to adopt it and absorb it within their fabric. Perfect example, I'm talking to a large retailer which wanted me to come in and talk to them about blockchain, and after that they told me that they're still in the early journey of SAP implementation, right? So that's where companies are, right? You have some companies which are maybe relatively far ahead in their digital transformation, but majority of them are still kind of grappling with existing ERP systems and how to get value from them. Blockchain is, again, not overnight going, at least I can only talk about supply chain, right? Blockchains are not going to overnight disrupt supply chains. Tomorrow, you will not be having all your food on the Ethereum or a public blockchain, right? Maybe if you go to a supermarket 5 years from now, 50 to 60% of some of those food items will have full traceability. It takes time, it's a journey. There are people in an enterprise. Many of you work for large companies. I mean, you have to do stakeholder management. You have to help them understand, not to forget, blockchain requires multiple parties to agree. You have to figure out what is the value proposition for each party, what is the ROI for each party. You have to kind of get them onboarded. And I don't even need to look at Juan, but I know he's nodding because that's what he and I end up doing on a daily basis. So it's a journey. So fully agree with all your points.
I want to add a point to this, because the reason we chose financial markets is because in a public blockchain, I'm not talking about private blockchain, but in the public blockchain, the adoption for a financial product could be lightning fast, right? Even though there are all these people who are kind of in the traditional world, sit in your way and make you do the international wire transfer, remittance, or whatever else, you can bypass all of that in the public blockchain. So the opportunities are not equal in different mediums. So the supply chain and financial market is the public blockchain is designed perfectly for that. But the supply chain for a private company, there's much more friction there for adoption, for implementation, for everything else. So I think choosing the vertical makes a huge difference, right? It's not It's not like all the markets, insurance and healthcare and finance are the same, right? Some of them are tremendously difficult and slow in adoption, and some of them will move at lightning speed.
You had a question?
Yeah, to the earlier point, financial markets tend to have standards. And the biggest dilemma with supply chain is that EDI standards actually replace this.
I agree. I will paraphrase it slightly, right? I think financial services companies are very good at identifying what is not value add or what is not differentiated, and are creating consortia that create the standards that then allows everybody else to focus on the differentiating aspects, right? And that's what has not happened in supply chain, right? And that's, so listening to the conversation before, right? Just 2 points to the gentleman here in the front, sorry, I forgot your name. Julian. So the other piece of advice that I will give you to my colleagues is focus on the leaders, right? In every revolution, there's going to be a leader and a lagger. So just focus on the leaders. Maybe they're a small company. Maybe they are not, you know, the big gorilla that you want to target. But focus on the ones who are really willing to take some risk and innovate, and focus on working with those. And the other thing there is, obviously, this is a blockchain technology forum, but at least what we're trying to do at IBM is not try to find kind of a specific solution that you can apply blockchain. We're, again, looking at our clients and see what pain points they have, and really see from all the technologies that are available, which one really applies where, right? So in some cases, blockchain probably is not the right solution to technology to deploy. And in other cases, you actually need to complement blockchain with microservices in the cloud or with RESTful APIs, which, by the way, EDIs are dear and here to my heart, right? And just without even having blockchain technology, just moving from EDI to RESTful APIs, that would be, wow, like, you know, a huge improvement, right? So again, work with leaders and try to also see how other complementary technologies you can deploy to be able to solve your client problems.
So I have an idea for you. I'm not a supply chain expert, but I would do, if I was jumping into your field, I would do an open ledger that is an overlay to the existing supply chain, meaning you don't have to insert it in the middle, but rather create an overlay where everybody just plugs in, because the value is in that shared information, instant shared information. So everybody can just, okay, good, so, see?
Hi, my name is Brooke, and I've been in the data modeling and data warehousing field for quite a while now. And so I also do business process re-engineering, and every time I come to one of these talks about blockchain, it seems to me there are two things that's going on above the blockchain technology. Yes, there is the blockchain technology, but if we have a business process that currently exists now, that will not should not work in the future, but people are not looking at the business process and how that should work on the blockchain. It sounds like to me, and tell me if this is incorrect, that they're just trying to take their current, some people are trying to take their current business model and put it in the blockchain and make it work, i.e. the metadata management, which I wouldn't even waste time doing that there. That sounds like there's one issue, one part of the issue. And part two of the issue, because I have a lot of Asian friends and I work with a lot of Indian nationals, there's a difference between the culture in Asia when someone, Indians, when they start a company versus the independent U.S. mind thought that this is my business, this is my company, this is my proprietary information. So how does that gel with having to come to a technology like blockchain that truly is supposed to have consensus, like in, say, the hospitality industry, when everyone in the hospitality industry, from the U.S. point of view, is more competitors that say work together.
So that's a fascinating question. So I think you had a few questions in there, but one of the ones that I'm keying on is really around the cross-cultural nature of adoption of blockchain, right?
Well, that's not the American culture.
Right. So, great question, firstly. So some background. In my 13-year career in supply chain, I've actually worked in over 25 countries. And there are few things that transcend cultures. And one of them is the right incentive mechanism. So irrespective of whether you live in a remote part of Indonesia to a very, I don't know, to Park Avenue here, if you have the right incentive to participate in a network, you will. That's the same thing that, I mean, you've in supply chain, right? That's what we do. The reason why 3 years ago I got into blockchain, well, I was actually kind of pushed into it because my boss said, we got to go sell this project in blockchain, and that was how I got into it. But the reason why I found it fascinating was because as a supply chain guy, and many of you I presume here are, isn't the problems that blockchain has in enterprise implementation what we do on a daily basis? Because as a supply chain person, when you're doing any transformation, you have to do the right stakeholder management. You have to work with people across different cultures because supply chains are highly global, right? And you have to figure out a way of incentivizing people across these different cultures to follow a common process, right? That's what really, if you really look at an enterprise blockchain implementation, it's all about, right? Helping everybody work on a common standard, which is a common process, and incentivizing them to do it. So even though, and I kind of joke, people say, oh, you're working in blockchain, it's a disruptive technology, but truly my job profile hasn't changed in the last 8 years, because the things you need to do to make blockchain successful in the enterprise, those elements are all the same you need to do to go on a supply chain transformational journey. So I know I got your last piece of the question. Can you repeat? Are there any other pieces I missed?
Oh, no, that's good for the culture.
Perfect,
piece, but
okay.
The other piece I was asking is trying to just people not really understanding, or businesses not really understanding that the way they do business today is they should drop what the way they're doing business today directly into the blockchain. That would be their solution.
Yeah, so I agree with you that that's not the right solution, because if you just took an existing business process and put it on a blockchain, you didn't create anything new, right? I mean, it didn't create a new model. So perfect example, and I guess I'll give you another supply chain example, is in procurement, when you are working with suppliers, tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 suppliers, right? There's a lot of reconciliation that happens, right? Back and forth. So you have two ways of solving this. One is you take the existing business process of reconciliation, put it on a blockchain, and tell your internal auditors to look at that blockchain, right? Or you can totally disrupt, which we kind of did with a client, or you can typically totally disrupt that business model and tell them, you know what, you will not have the need of having any auditors, any people writing contracts, because all of that will be automated using smart contracts. And by the way, the price you paid will always be the price you agreed, because all of that will come from the blockchain. So that's a kind of a disruption, and that kind of has that value. Now, I think you also had a question like, how do you get people to do that? That has a twofold value, right? A, FTE headcount reduction, because you don't need people sitting and looking at purchase orders and invoicing and doing reconciliation. And the other is value leakage, right? In the world of supply chain, we spend a lot of money doing reconciliation. And I mean, I can tell you one thing about reconciliation: whatever you catch, that's the value you capture, but there's a lot what you don't catch. In my personal opinion, and this is not EY's opinion, my personal opinion, there's over $1 trillion of value that exists in this world today, which is left uncaptured, because companies are losing that value even after having an army of people trying to reconcile. So I think I think when you start re-engineering your business processes across those networks, that's the untold really value that blockchains will start capturing as they get implemented correctly from a network of enterprises. Sorry. Sorry.
You've been waiting for a while, Mark. Go on.
So many of the big blockchain projects are sort of like for the good of the many projects, making banks cheaper for people to use, socializing money, making healthcare easier, those kind of projects. When you meet with a company that relies on fees, and people are trying to solve 10 years, we're going to go out of business because there are people reinventing. Are you having that conversation?
So actually that affects our business the most, right? Ernst & Young is an audit business, right? So of course, we have these candidly discussions. I mean, majority of our business is audit, and consulting is now a very fast-growing segment, but we have this discussion very regularly. But here's the beauty of business, right? As older businesses become legacy and kind of fade away, new businesses come. So everybody's talking about smart contracts and automation of the smart contracts, right? On Monday of this week, I was in DC, and I was actually grilled by 25 vice presidents of internal auditors of 25 top retailers in this country, right, on blockchain. And interestingly, what came out of that was actually the audit profession is not going to be, it's going to be disruptive, but actually for the good. Because somebody needs to go and audit and certify that the smart contract did what it was supposed to do, right? So you still need auditors. Someone's got to go, and if you're automating taxes, I'm actually doing a project where we're trying to figure out how we can do whole tax automation feeding into the payments with banks and then kind of feeding back to actually a vendor. Someone's got to go and verify that the taxes on that blockchain are certified, are the ones that were appropriated, right? So there's a lot of new work that only once, but now if you, I don't know if you, are you aware of the SOX compliance? Yeah. So SOX compliance is not a one-time activity.
But if the blockchain just spits out the SOX report, you just did it once.
Blockchain will split out the. No, because the fact of the matter is we are also building technology on it. So for example, EY right now is the largest, actually out of all the big four, we audit the maximum cryptocurrency exchanges, right? So it's a big, fast-growing business because there's a lot of regulation around that and people need to figure out. So another fast-growing business for us. We are building, and we just publicly announced last week, we are building a lot of technology around auditing and automating auditing and using that as a tool internally. So even companies like EY, as we get disrupted, we are creating new technology, and we are investing in technology, creating platforms that would help both regulators and large companies kind of understand where things are. So I agree, it disrupts the traditional audit process, but it gives us an opportunity to get into new building platforms and assets, which wasn't traditionally our business, and kind of selling that to new clients and getting new business. So I guess it's kind of a yin and a yang, right? I mean, you kind of lose some traditional business and then you kind of get new business. Does that help answer?
Just to add one comment, Kodak at its peak still did more revenues than all the camera guys do today. So to your point, you're right. I mean, there's no way where we're going to introduce all this innovation and all this automation and all this compliance and all the AML stuff going to be fully automated, and we're still going to need all the auditors and all the people and everything else. So the whole point is to eliminate all that cost, and all these people are going to move to create other intellectual property and other type of stuff. So yes, you know, like there's going to be a whole bunch of industry being squeezed. It's definitely not being replaced one-to-one, but you know, that's the biggest problem we have in this country is retraining people to go after new opportunities.
So the three of you are progressive. The rest of the banks are like, hey, what's blockchain? Do they know this yet?
No, but I think everybody has learned a lesson, right? All of these guys have gone to business school, they have do case studies, right? And they know that either you disrupt yourself or somebody's going to come and disrupt you, right? That's why all the banks now have all these VC arms where they're trying to work with the startups and invest in small startups, right? Why do they do that? Because they want to see the technology that's coming. They want to see what different business models are coming so that they can apply it themselves, right? And yeah, that actually relates to the comment earlier, right? And that's the experience that we're having when we talk to big corporations, right? Like the collaboration that we have with Maersk Line, what we're doing is going to disrupt them, and they are fully aware of it. But they'd rather do that themselves and lead than just wait and see that some other small company actually is now taking their lead, right?
So I want to correct a misperception. I think there's a traditional stereotype that we all have, the Fortune 500s, slow, not going to adopt. And that is, I think, generally in my experience, untrue. I don't think you can think of the Fortune 500s monolithically, but rather there are some that are lead adopters in financial services, for example, Goldman, in CPGs, Procter & Gamble in some areas, in retail, Walmart and Kroger. So you have some of the Fortune 500s that are actually out ahead, and within those big companies, you have teams and executives that are out ahead. But having now talked to tons and tons of Fortune 500s, I can definitely say that the blocker is actually not having the right tech and coordination between the Fortune 500s. I see just tons of Fortune 500 execs leaning in, and Sharad, I think, seems to spend half his time on a plane actually visiting different Fortune 500s that are trying to learn more about blockchain. It's getting a little hot in here, so I'm going to redirect from talking about auditing. We're going to get to some questions in a moment. We're going to talk about salad. Okay, how many people here like Caesar salad? How many people here saw the CDC warning in the last few weeks about romaine lettuce? Yeah, I did. It was pretty scary. So it got me thinking. It was actually one of the reasons why I first got involved in blockchain was supply chain and the idea that you can actually track multi-party shipments. So first I thought, well, if everything was on the blockchain, theoretically, they could find the source of the problem of why this romaine lettuce was poisoning people. But then I thought, I can see how it's tracked on the blockchain, but how do you take the atoms of lettuce and translate it into bits and track it on the blockchain? So I've had a chance to work with some very interesting companies that are doing IoT and cold chain as a service, like Controllant out of Iceland. But one big topic we haven't covered across the two panels tonight that I want to make sure that we give our panelists a chance to talk about, which is what I think is probably one of the biggest problems in terms of mainstreaming blockchain, which is how do you actually take atoms and convert that into data that is then tracked on the blockchain? So would love to hear from each of the three of you about that.
So how do you take, sorry, can you repeat?
Physical objects and track them. Like, what is the best technology for that?
Well, that's what blockchain does, right? It's the tokenization of a real asset.
Blockchain is a distributed ledger. What I'm wondering about is the IoT devices that feed the blockchain.
Yeah, so basically blockchain records the digital record, right? And that digital record is that tokenization of the actual good, right? So where in supply chain, there is a physical movement of goods, right? So you created a digital version of that good, and that's what you can put in the blockchain, right? But now, the challenge is, how do you do that? Because at some point somebody's entering information, right? At some point, like, the blockchain to track diamonds, right? At some point somebody's actually saying, okay, this is the diamond and this is the digital version of the diamond, right? So there are still cracks in the data input side of things, and that's what IoT comes to place, right? Because you eliminate every human intervention, right? If the package already has an RFID or a GPS device, there is no human intervention whatsoever. The package is just in real time telling you what it is, right? So actually, so Maersk Line has already deployed GPS devices in all the refrigerated containers, because those are power containers that need to be powered all the way through, right? So it's easy to put a GPS device. Now the challenge is on putting GPS devices on all the other million of containers, because those are, dumb boxes, right? And just the logistic of having to change the batteries of GPS devices worldwide is still something that we're trying to figure out, right? And hopefully RFDI technology that doesn't require power will get there, but that's the exciting part, right? So blockchain is about getting data, achieving consensus on what is the right data to record in the ledger, and then everybody have that permutable record of data that we all agree is the right data. But how do you input the data there? That's where IoT technology can really help.
Sharad really wants to answer this one.
So I'll jump in the middle, because my previous life before Celsius, I actually was CEO of Novotel Wireless, which is a big supplier of IoT devices, and I can tell you that the high value products like drugs and definitely weapons and everything else is connected all the time to a 4G network, and everybody knows where it is at all times. The problem goes to lower value products where the sensor itself is still too expensive, and the network cost and all that stuff is preventing the supply chain from they're already barely making any money, right? So you want to plug in an extra device there, and they're like, no, we can't afford it, right? So So the issue is not on the technology side. The issue is more about getting everybody in the supply chain to just implement the sensors and absorb that cost, because there's no benefit. There's no, like, for everybody to know and have once every 3 years a disaster so they can grab that lettuce. Currently, there's no ROI on that, right? That's the problem. Dead people don't count.
Okay, so I'm really excited to talk about
Don't
this
tweet
because,
that.
I spent a lot of time actually on this very topic. In fact, before coming here, that's the conversation I was having with my team for figuring out how to track medicines from a warehouse in Sierra Leone to the actual end patient. So that's for a customer actually. So let's take 2 steps up. Firstly, fully agree with the panel here. In order for you to successfully track an asset, you first tokenize that asset, as Juan said. And what that really means is you need to give that asset a digital identity, right? A token, right? And as that asset moves across the physical world, that token has to move through the blockchain world, right? So to do that, you have to go create what we call a digital twin. Now, there are many ways of creating a digital twin actually. And the more time I've spent in this, the more I've realized there are many inexpensive ways. So here are some tips for some startups who are in this space, and if you end up making some money, just throw some in mine and Rob's way. So, so the more sophisticated way, as Juan also stated, is IoT, right? So the whole idea is, as the whole blockchain and the whole industry 4.0 and everything, emerging technologies and AI have been taking hype, one very interesting thing has been happening in the world. The price of hardware has been crashing. So as the price of hardware has been crashing, you're getting more and more IoT devices which you can kind of put on assets, right? And those IoT devices can do anything from temperature sensing to pressure to geolocation to a variety of things. So that's, I call them the high-end devices, right? Here's the challenge. You can't put that on a lettuce. You cannot go put that on an asset which is not very high-end. So that's the first gamut, right? So if you have a high-end asset, you go put IoT. Now within the IoT layer also, you have the sophisticated IoT devices, then you can have NFC tags, RFC tags, RFIDs, passive, active, right? So you have a whole hierarchy. So based on how expensive your asset is in that expense profile, you can actually select a tag, right? Now let's go down. So this logistics company that I was working with was using QR codes, right? And they were using scanning of QR codes. So that's another example of relatively the next level of inexpensive way where you can say, hey, I have QR codes across my network, so maybe I scan QR codes, right? Then you go down the next level, barcodes, right? We've already gone through 3 decades of barcode tracking, right? So I have barcodes already in my supply chain. Maybe I create a digital twin using that. Let's come to that last level, the level where you got to go track stuff in remote part of Africa and Asia and South America, right? There's no RFID tags. There's no way you can put IoT devices on it. There is no way you can put NFC tags. There's no way you can put barcodes and QR codes. So it turns out that mobile penetration in Africa and Asia has gone down till the lowest level. So people don't have smartphones, but everyone has a phone that does text messaging. So the challenge I have, and what we're working with the team, is could we use text messaging to start creating that digital twin to that last mile? Because everyone, you go to remote, I come from India, you can go to the remotest part of India and you'll find phones. You now go to the remotest parts of Africa, you find 3G networks. So there's a lot of work happening in saying, look, there is existing infrastructure of the way people interact with one another. Could that become your digital twin? So I think the answer for that, depending on your asset, is, the more inexpensive that asset becomes, you have to get more and more creative on the way you can actually track it. And there are creative ways to track even a piece of lettuce. You just have to kind of figure that out. I don't know if that helps. I won't tell you how we'll track using text messaging, because that's, I guess that is the secret sauce.
Using text messages to track lettuce. So I want to go back to your point. You said that...
or you taste it and you report if you're dead or alive.
Yeah. So I'd have to disagree with you a little bit on dead people don't count, and there is no
I was
economic
just kidding.
justification.
I retract that comment.
Well, as luck would have it, we actually have a supply chain expert here tonight from a company called Controllant. You guys focus on cold chain as a service, I think, out of Iceland. If you could tell us a little bit about what you guys are doing that's public in terms of using IoT to track in pharma and food globally. Thanks for throwing him under the bus.
Thank you. And calling me a supply chain expert is very generous. So, but to several of your points, the traditional challenge with putting IoT sensors, devices, and I guess eyeballs on everything throughout the world, and making it, I guess, is making it scalable down to lettuce, all the way up to, of course, pharmaceuticals or any product. That has been a challenge, and from a technological standpoint, we're at a certain I guess economics there. But what we've been able to, so we're with a company called Controllant, and we are monitoring Chipotle, for example, 40,000 shipments a year of every product that they ship, including we actually started with trucks of lettuce, and it's not necessarily by reinventing the technology itself and the sensors themselves, but creating business processes and systems around it. And to your point earlier, it's what we've been able to do that's really transformed the companies we're working with is aligned incentives and by aligning the incentives and reinventing our own business model, we've actually made it economically viable and brought the cost down so much for everyone involved that we're actually now able to scale it globally. We actually do have the ability to monitor vaccine refrigerators and other products in the deepest parts of Africa and remotest parts of the world. But as far as monitoring every individual package, that we still haven't gotten to. But you'd be surprised how scalable the putting sensors for all the measurements that you mentioned and scaling those globally actually has become, if you have the right business and processes in place. So.
Well, and some of the new LTE standards, the ones that's just coming out now, we were doing one of the first 4.5G testing with Qualcomm. They're passive, so the battery could actually last for 10 years. So, because they're not constantly checking and checking with the network and so on. So, there's definitely a huge evolution on the life of the sensor and how much power it requires and how much it costs you. Actually, AT&T right now does. You pay only $1 to activate the network, and then you just pay for the messages. So there's no monthly recurring, which kind of completely changes the business model. What? No, this is my previous life. We were the largest vendor for Verizon.
How many
IoT.
lives have you had?
I'm 170 years old.
So what gets really interesting if you think about it with IoT and in the devices on the edge in shipments that are actually feeding data up into a decentralized blockchain, one of the things that I find interesting is if you play that out a few steps forward, it actually becomes almost like a foundational or data layer on which you can then layer machine learning and artificial intelligence and eventually automation. So if you take, for example, the Controllant use case, what's fascinating to me is not just you have devices on the shipments that are sending data up into the cloud, but ultimately you can build an intelligence layer that can do intelligent routing, sort of like a Waze, but for shipments, that can actually intelligent route without the need for humans, and then it starts to get really interesting. So as we kind of think about the future of supply chain and where supply chain and blockchain is going in the future, we've talked about short-term challenges around adoption and devices. Where's this all going?
So firstly, Rob, great point. And I think that's where it's going. What blockchains promise is to put actually AI on steroids. Biggest problem with AI projects, at least in the enterprise, is if you have an 8-week AI project, you spend 6 weeks cleansing data. And then you spend this, anyone here who does machine learning AI here? do you guys have problem cleansing data? Is that a big problem, right? So if you have one foundational layer of data, think about how you can get back those 6 weeks to really truly train your models to start giving the promise of AI, which is all about automating decisions, right? And I think that's where supply chains are headed as you go and start integrating IoT with to a blockchain, and then finally you kind of put some kind of an AI layer on top of it. I think supply chains will start being more automated in the decision making and more optimized across the different segments they work on. And I think that's been always the promise, but the regular ERP systems which have done production optimizer and scheduling and planning have always struggled from the data and having manual people trying to figure out those models and trying to cleanse them. I think all of that will start happening more automated. And that will also enable a lot of kind of interaction more seamlessly in a totally automated fashion. So I think that's where supply chains are headed, more leaner, relatively more automated.
So the future is data cleansing.
The future is no more data cleansing, because I think the present is all about data cleansing. Yeah, the future is there won't be a need for data cleansing, because I mean, you're a data analyst. You work with data. You know the mess most data systems are today. Garbage out, exactly. And I think so we're going to
No political discussions tonight.
So I think as blockchains become more tightly integrated with IoT, below in the stack, and as they become more tightly integrated with AI and other analytics above in the stack, that's what's going to help with more of that automation in a supply chain, which still, there is a promise for it, but I don't think most supply chains get that. So I think that's what's going to do.
So I've been told we have time for just one more question.
Can I just add to that for a second? I think we have two opinions, different opinions.
Okay, make them fast. Make them
Quick.
fast.
I'll make it quick. I see a huge opportunity for disruption. So whoever comes again with that overlay solution that can reinvent with a decentralized solution, a supply chain, especially with the ones where there's a big toll collector in the middle, the guy who's dominant, who doesn't want any of the stuff we talked about here to be adopted. If you can come and replace all of that, that's where the riches are, right? Because then you're coming and replacing the whole ecosystem, the whole supply chain with a whole new different implementation of technology and so on. So yes, you can play on the edges and make things a little bit better, or you can disrupt all of it. I'm only interested in that part. So I'll leave it,
What the future looks like forward, true, just in time. So basically with all these sensors, where your refrigerator is almost like I open the door and magically the bottle of milk appears there. So
that sounds like Amazon.
That's really the future, right? And I don't think we're that far away from there, right? The challenges there are going to be data privacy, because you're not going to want to share that much information with a single party, but blockchain can solve on that as well. And the pessimistic side of me is that eventually, as a human race, we're going to become, have you guys watched the movie Wall-E from Disney? We're going to become these fat individuals just sitting on automatic chairs. We don't need to do anything, right?
So the future is being fat. That sounds awesome. But you do actually bring up a really good point, which is when I've talked to a lot of retailers, I think that one of the best times for new technology adoption is when there's periods of profound change. Amazon, especially with its acquisition of Whole Foods, is massively disrupting a lot of supply chains, especially the food supply chain. And so the single biggest reason that I've heard from retailers and CPGs of why they want to try new technology like blockchain is because they're scared like crazy of Amazon. And if you look very clearly where Amazon is going, it's just-in-time delivery of anything you want if you're an Amazon Prime member into your fridge. And that scares the hell out of CPGs and the hell out of retailers, but also creates a great opportunity for companies that can help solve the problems for retailers and CPGs. We have time for one last question. The guy in the back has had his hand up like 5 times. So get up, introduce yourself. Really awesome, snappy, short question.
More of a comment, but whatever. Michael Rentz, I work for Maersk. I'm the head of business development for North America for Maersk Trade Finance. We've kind of been talking about it a little bit. And this goes more to the actual supply chain. It seems that the conversation throughout the entire night has been a bit more oriented towards the flow of money. And much bigger picture to look at now, which is the actual flow of goods. And there are a lot of parties that participate in that flow of goods. I know the cryptocurrency thing is sexy, and moving 40-foot containers from one place on Earth to another place is not sexy. There's a lot of people that do that. And Maersk has already conducted a pilot where we've transported a 40-foot container from Kenya to Rotterdam, and we found out that the documentation that's necessary to move that container changed hands 200 times. And so we talked to Mike White, or you talked to Juan, they say it's $1 trillion savings. We're not generating revenue, but it's savings because every single one of those changing of hands for documentation, there's a price to pay with that, typically owned by the banks because they own the letter of credit or they own the bill of exchange, and they'll charge you $30 here, $30 there. So immediately, what we're seeing that's in real time, and tracking that is amazing. That is way down the road. But right now, what we're seeing is a decentralized ledger that is safe, that is secure, where it's no longer chronological. Here's the bill of exchange. Here's the bill of lading. Here's the packing list. Now we can move the goods. In real time, each individual party, whether it's 200 or 10, can say that's completed. It's encrypted. It's safe. Now you can move the goods. And so I think the savings that are associated with moving the goods seamlessly are trillions of dollars, and that's a real application of the blockchain today. I just had to make that point because that's what we're doing, and I think there's a lot of brilliant people here that can contribute to making that even better.
That was an awesome comment, and I think we need you for the next panel. So we've come to the end of what I think is probably one of the most intense events I've ever moderated. I'd like to thank the panelists. If we could have a round of applause. Also, wait, before you leave, a huge amount of work went into putting this event on tonight, and I know because I was on about 100 of those emails. So if we could have an applause for our host tonight that organized it.